Welcome back to Prime Live. Today we'll be delving into South Africa's meeting with the G20 finance ministers. South Africa will be hosting the first meeting of the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors next week on the 26th and 27th of February in Cape Town, but a notable absence of Scott Bessent, the US Secretary of Treasury. This is the latest manifestation of rising tensions between the superpower and South Africa. John Stremlau is the Honorary Professor of International Relations at Wits University. He joins me now to unpack what all this means in the light of South Africa's G20 presidency. Professor, good to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm having a little difficult time hearing you, but I think you asked for my assessment of the current U.S. policy towards South Africa. Is that right?
Yes. So basically, you wrote in the Daily Maverick this week that the stance by US calls into question whether it's a suitable host for next year's summit. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, the piece speaks for itself, but I was motivated to write it because I was outraged by the interference in the domestic affairs of a fellow G20 state and a fellow Democrat by Donald Trump. And he had no role in picking South Africa as the site for the 2025 G20 presidency, but it's between Brazil and then now in 2026 the U.S. And because he denigrated and ignorantly so the Expropriation Land Act, the DEI, which is at the core of the South African Constitution of '96, and then climate change, which every scientist knows on this planet is real and is getting worse, then I felt, the U.S. just can't get away with this kind of stuff. And I just wondered whether or not the convening of the G20 here in Johannesburg presented and actually a remarkable opportunity, because in his executive order that claimed that South Africa poses a national security threat to our nation, that is the United States, which is nonsense, but that he was willing to kill all assistance to South Africa and financial aid, and also offered, incredibly, the Afrikaners refuge and refugee status in the United States at a time when he's expelling everybody else, so from the South, global South. And so I just could not fathom this, and I thought that maybe by writing a piece that clarified, given my accent, from the perspective of someone who has known South Africa very well and thrived in it, I just felt I couldn't not take a polemical view of the insanity of the craziness of Trump's and bullying. It's just bullying.
No, I understand. I think that's really great that you actually took the time out to write that piece for us, because, judging by your expertise and everything, you knew exactly the words to say and to direct, especially to President Donald Trump and the people that are involved in accusing South Africa as well. So South Africa has been accused of anti-American behavior. In your opinion, how much of our case against Israel at the ICJ have been... Sorry, 1 second.
Well, that's an undercurrent, and I'm very sympathetic to the ICJ case. I thought it was very carefully structured and reasoned, and does not have enforcement powers, but does set a marker down about South Africa and its views on the Palestinians and their survival, and we've had this disproportionate response to the October 7th mayhem that Sinwar perpetrated on Israel, but there is no comparison to the 1,000 who were killed, and yet the 46 or God only knows how many Palestinians, innocent women and children, were killed in this carpet bombing of Gaza. But the problem of apartheid in Israel is well known, and I first heard it from the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, Marin Benvenisti, in 1985, for heaven's sakes. And Jimmy Carter, for whom I worked at the Carter Center, wrote a book, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. So, this is a long story, and you know better than I. But I think it does loom in the background of the Trump approach, because he's an ethnic cleanser. He just thinks getting rid of the Palestinians, and he won't take them in himself like the Afrikaners, but they're whites, so he can take those in. But and they may not want to go, actually, because South Africa does sanctify each individual identity, so long as it doesn't impose on the rights and privileges of other identities. And so this is a country where I feel very much at home, even though I'm a white minority and speak a different language.
I think that's very true and honest also, because the Afrikaners here have obviously established their home, established everything here, business and everything. So why would they obviously want to just jump and obviously go? So it raises a point to that as well. South Africa's theme for its G20 presidency has also been attacked. Trump is against diversity, inclusion and equity. And climate change policies. Is not ironic that even our employment equity legalization is based on US own DEI. Is that correct?
Well, I couldn't hear all your question properly, but I would like to interject that not only did the decision to make South Africa the host was taken before Trump assumed power, but he is now cavalierly disregarding the core norms of the G20, which is toleration for diverse preferences domestically, as is the case of the United Nations. And that kind of tolerance is not evident in Trump's intervention. And I thought that maybe there were so many Western Europeans who are angry at Donald Trump. There are so many in the global South who are angry at Donald Trump. And with Putin not being allowed to come here because he's under indictment for the ICC, and in South Africa is a member, so I assume that he'll be virtual at the summit. And I don't know whether Donald Trump is going to show up at the summit, but I thought that the reason for the domestic policy reasons for Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, to miss this foreign ministers does provide an opportunity for South Africa to do what it does best, which is negotiate an agreement, a consensus agreement, if you can possibly do that. And I understand the difficulties, but nevertheless, someone should try, and no better candidate than South Africa, though the only African member of the G20, and this is the first meeting in Africa, and that South Africa is promoting North-South cooperation. So let's get on with it, and hopefully it can exploit the anti-Trump feeling around the world and in the United States, by the way, and so rein them in a little bit, and it would be just a symbolic. If they question the credibility and ability to host in 2026 of the United States, and that would be a good thing, in my view only.
No, I would agree actually. So let's address the G20 itself. How do you think its members will respond to the outbursts by the world's most powerful state? Do you think it will eventually become the G19 or even worse? Even fewer countries will attend this year?
Well, that's an interesting question. the global South is represented in the G20, but only those states which are middle powers. And South Africa is championing the inclusion of the poorer African states as well. And in a sense, by making the AU a member of the G20, and the EU is already a member of the G20, maybe the G20 could become the core big emerging markets and middle powers, but also have regional representation without it becoming a mini United Nations. I mean, there are creative ways of doing this, but it is, after all, an organization that doesn't have any secretariat. It doesn't have any enforcement powers. It really is a discussion group. But I think that the tendency to decenter the United States is inevitable, and I think it helps to have the BRICS in the G20, and the G20 willing to listen to BRIC members along with the others that are included in the G20. So it's a way of focusing on growth and development, and to still tolerate sovereignty and very different domestic systems within those sovereign nations. There is one humanity, but that's in the Constitution of South Africa. But South Africa is an outlier in that liberal constitution.
I would say so as well. This is the first time an African country has actually presumed presidency of the G20 also. So the African Union is also expected to take part. Do you think this will further isolate the USA on the continent?
Well, I would hope that it will do the opposite. I would hope that it would become more integral to the conversation and enhance the status of the AU, and as well as South Africa as a broker for North-South cooperation. But it's a long process, and as I say, there is a tendency toward multipolarity that is I think looking out for myself rather than for my collective, and that's very contrary to South Africa's approach to humanity with Ubuntu, and we'll see whether or not it sticks. But the Donald Trump intervention in the domestic affairs and using the G20 through Marco Rubio to register his concerns, which are peculiar and not very American, frankly, at least in my experience, and certainly not Martin Luther King America, but in any case, and civil rights America. But America is becoming a majority country, and it will be by the next decade. And so this is the last hurrah of the white Christian males.
Now, hopefully, we don't know what the future will hold for us, obviously. What collective can the G20 take to show its commitment to the spirit of multinationalism?
Well, the spirit of multinationalism is very real, and it is in this case of South Africa. That's what is so ironic about South Africa hosting it. It is a much more composite nation, as Frederick Douglass described, for the American scene, and the Americans are moving in that direction. And so why not appeal to the you don't have to prescribe for domestic policies in America, but you just have to send delegations that are going to talk to civil society and business community leaders and work on it, as the anti-apartheid did so effectively. And admittedly, that was a different era for South Africa. It has to be much more concerned about its sovereignty. But as I say in the piece, I don't think it's worth talking to Donald Trump or Elon Musk, who is South African of a different generation, and it was raised under apartheid, as was David Sachs, and others. Peter Thiel was in Southwest Africa and in Sukhumban, for heaven's sakes. And so, I don't know I don't know any of these people personally, but they carry a baggage of socialization that is kind of scary as an American.
I would agree. I think that's really, really scary for what holds, especially for Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and all of them. It was really great to have you on the show, Professor John Stremlau. Really great that you wrote that article for us. I really hope things can blow out from here, that things can be noticed as well. Thank you so much for having you on the show today.
Just let me add one more thing, and that is the Muslim Americans are very much in swing states, and I just hope that that you will reach out to them and say, "Isn't this absurd that the Trump administration is doing this?" Because you can do that transnationally. So I'm sure you are, but I just encourage you to do that.
Be the best way to do that. Thank you so much for bringing that to the table for us. Okay. I think we will definitely put that on. Thank you so much, Professor John Stremlau. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. That was Professor John Stremlau streaming in live. Thank you so much for tuning in today.